Let's say that we have 3 independent communities, each with a section of pasture. In Community A, the pasture land is split up amongst its residents, so each family privately owns a portion of the land and can do what they want with it. In Community C, this used to be the case, but now the majority of the land is owned by a local entrepreneur, Carol. And in Community B, the pasture land is mutually owned by the public. Each of these 3 communities has taken a different approach to ownership and the use of scarce resources. In Community A, all members of the neighborhood have read Hardin's 1968 paper on the tragedy of the commons. Afraid that their neighbors would destroy a commonly shared space, they have split up the land into privately owned parcels. Traditional and current economic doctrine suggests that this approach to ownership is the most efficient and fair. While everyone has a right to own property, those who are most productive with their ownership will prosper the most. But this model assumes a lot. It quickly unravels if we add in the many factors of real life. Some people are born with land, some plots are fertile, while some are shitty. Someone knows the people who work on the zoning board and are pals with the mayor. Structural inequities will influence this system of ownership. This is only more cause for Case A to turn into what we see in Case C. Carol went to Wharton and believes that commonly shared resources will inevitably be overused. As a Wharton grad, she's an entrepreneur and believes in economies of scale, and through her innovation and hard work, she's able to buy out her neighbors, soon owning the majority of the pasture land in Community C. Nice job, Carol! Your Wharton education was worth it. Carol, an entrepreneur, looking to move on to more opportunities elsewhere, sells up the land to the highest bidder, Don Corp. Don Corp owns and manages 10 different pastures and is motivated by its shareholders. Don Corp is quick to impose their tried-and-true business model in Community C in order to increase profits. They restrict all community access to the pasture, hire employees on an hourly basis, integrate the product with their global supply chain, and lease some of the land to an energy exploration company. While this scenario won't make it in the traditional take of Hardin's story of the commons and the power of private ownership, this story of concentrated ownership is a common one today in America. Since 1973, worker productivity has gone up 75%, while pay has only risen 9%, and since 1960, the real value of the minimum wage decreased over 40%. In the same period, the wages of the top 1% have grown 140%. The 3 wealthiest people in the United States, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and Warren Buffett, own more wealth than the entire bottom half of the population combined, a total of 160 million people, while 8 men own the same as the world's bottom half. These facts show a striking disparity of economic conditions that have led to especially precarious and volatile conditions for poor families. Faced by these statistics, it's clear that Community A, where private but equal ownership seems to exist, is in fact often superseded by the realities of private ownership and Community C. Because it tends to turn into Community C, we are skeptical of the practices of Community A. Community A is of the doctrine that if we teach people how to fish, they will be able to feed themselves, but it overlooks the fact that for most of the world, someone else owns the rod, the pond, and the bait. Now let's take Community B. That's where we live. We and our neighbors share ownership of the pasture. While Hardin would suggest that this would inevitably lead to degradation and tragedy, us and our neighbors aren't so easily duped. We've read Eleanor Ostrom and Ian Angus and recognize that throughout history, communities have been able to work out shared management of natural resources. Also, the nature of a community means that we and our neighbors have realized that if we overcultivate the limited and shared pasture land, it will eventually be ruined. Through discussion with one another, we've come up with a system whereby all people in the community graze only the amount they need, which ensures that there will be enough for other and future farmers. What's cool is that these rules aren't coming from the outside, but are rather enhanced from inside the community. The data also shows that companies with shared employee ownership, or communities like ours, actually do better. There's no overgrazing, no selfishness, and no tragedy. While the commons may seem reasonable but impossible in today's world, the commons exist successfully all over the world. We can look at the Alaska Permanent Oil Fund, which, based on the rationale that the oil fields underneath Alaska are the property of the residents, has for 40 years divided oil revenues between the state's residents and a fund for future generations. Commons exist all over the internet, too, with sites such as Wikipedia providing an open platform for information transfer. The commons has also been valuable in international development efforts in communities previously devastated by colonialism and free market capitalism. These commons, however, continue to face strong opposition from market economists looking to monetize or regulate them. These opponents cite neoclassical economic thought like Garrett Hardin's Tragedy of the Commons, which itself was largely built on the theory of the rational economic coined by a famous old white dude, J.S. Mill, in the mid-19th century. Mill's belief was that economics treats
the whole of man's nature as concerned with him solely as a being who desires to possess wealth, and who is capable of judging the comparative efficacy of means for obtaining that end.
By the early 20th century, this line of thinking evolved into the full-fledged theory that the rational man will act independently and will do anything to fulfill his insatiable wants. But Elinor Ostrom, the badass she was, won a Nobel Prize in economics in 2009 for disproving Hardin's theory of the tragedy of the commons. Ostrom's work also deconstructed the theory of the rational economic man, showing that thinking as a community and for the future can and does lead to more efficient outcomes. So it seems, though, the biggest myth is in fact Hardin's tragedy of the commons. If this is the case, then why did it take us till 2017 to learn this while we were taught Hardin in high school? Why has this myth been allowed to persist despite facts and a history that disproves it?